This is Proxy Countdown. Welcome to the big show for the week of April 29th, 2024, alongside my tag team partner, Matt Moscardi.
Hey,
I'm Damian Rollis, and today's countdown, Paramount CEO Bob Bakish replaced by an Office of the CEO. Unions and proxy advisors weigh in at the Norfolk Southern proxy cage match. Glass Lewis has an opinion about the Boeing board. At AGM votes, directors keep their jobs. And on the big vote, we try something different this week. We're not going to focus on one company. Let's get to our trade wire. CEO Kevin Hourican is consolidating power at Cisco Corporation after board chair Edward Shirley announced he is stepping down for health reasons. Now that the CEO is also the chair, Larry Glasscock will become lead independent director. So why not just make Mr. Glasscock the chair in the first place?
Doesn't make much sense.
Marvell Technology, despite having only 3 female directors with a combined 6% influence, is appointing 2 more men to the board, Rick Wallace and Daniel Dunn. William Stengel II will be the new CEO at Genuine Parts. Before you get too excited, however, former CEO Paul Donahue will remain on the board as its executive chair.
It's the baller move these days. That's the baller move.
Padraig McDonnell is the new CEO at Agilent Technologies as Michael McMullen is retiring. And yes, he's actually leaving the board, so have at it, Padraig. Matthew Bromberg is the new CEO at Unity Software. Just for showing up, he will receive a Golden Hello bonus of $2 million in cash and over 3 million restricted stock units and stock options. And 2/3 of those equity awards is not tied to performance of any kind.
Any kind. Just for showing up.
And finally, in our trade water, CEO Bob Bakish is out at Paramount Global and will be replaced by a 3-headed monster called Brian Robbins, Chris McCarthy, and George Cheeks in what is being called the Office of the CEO.
I've never heard of this.
According to reports, Bakish alienated Shari Redstone, chair of Paramount and CEO of National Amusements, which controls 77% of Paramount's voting stock. According to Fortune magazine, Bakish lost Redstone's loyalty in a way that echoes the treatment that she endured at the hands of her father, Sumner Redstone. The elder Redstone was known to belittle her in meetings in front of executives, badmouth her in the press, and undercut her chances of succeeding him in the CEO role. The Wall Street Journal reported that Bakish reportedly went behind Redstone's back in floating a potential streaming partnership with Comcast earlier this year. Also, Paramount is currently mired in one of the most dramatic corporate takeover battles in recent memory, with dueling offers from a group led by Oracle founder Larry Ellison's son, David, and his company Skydance Media, and a $26 billion joint bid from Sony and private equity firm Apollo. So Skydance's proposal would pay Shari Redstone a hefty premium for her voting shares, allowing it to take control of National Amusements and Paramount without having to offer non-voting Paramount shareholders anything except equity, whereas Apollo's proposal would offer every shareholder a smaller premium, which is more popular with Paramount's broader investor base, but would result in a much smaller windfall for Redstone, who controls enough of a voting stake in the company that she could potentially block it. So this is all about Shari Redstone.
Well, the best part about this is their commitment to transparency, in which they just held an earnings call where they said at the beginning, we will take no questions, and played on loop the Mission Impossible soundtrack at the end of it.
Which is great. One of my favorite Paramount movies.
It was one of the only ones that I care anything about. But it is a really bizarre. I mean, this is what happens when you have dual class shares.
Yes, thank you.
And
exactly.
Voting power that's consolidated with one family that lasts generations.
Dictatorships, totalitarian control at public companies is this is what you get. Let's move over to our proxy cage matches. Let's start at Boeing. where I think just this morning, proxy advisor Glass Lewis is recommending a vote against outgoing CEO Dave Calhoun. And they're also targeting Audit Committee Chair Akhil Johri, who has been on the board since only 2020, and Aerospace Safety Committee Chair David Joyce, the former CEO at GE Aviation, who has been on the board since only 2021. Despite this, Glass Lewis is recommending a vote to approve Say on Pay for 2023 compensation, despite the fact that CEO Calhoun's pay package rose about 45% to nearly $33 million.
I could
don't know
not
what's going
be
on at Glass
more
Lewis.
confused by this voting recommendation. I mean, I am on board with we will do Boeing in a future show. I'm on board with getting Dave Calhoun out
Sure,
of there.
of course.
But
Although
Akhil
should have happened
Johri
before,
and David Joyce are the newer. They're not the responsible for the culture. What is this?
And they're not targeting the nomination committee chair. They're clearly not mad at pay, so they're not targeting the compensation committee chair. But I don't know.
There's no rhyme or reason to it anymore to me.
Yeah, because the safety culture in place obviously predated David Joyce's involvement. So I don't really understand that connection. Let's go to the battle at Norfolk Southern. A lot going on in this since we covered it last week on this show. So first, ISS. So ISS, their Taft-Hartley advisory services and their social advisory services, which focus recommendations on regulated unions and socially responsible investors, said that investors should back Norfolk Southern activist Ancora and its CEO pick Jim Barber, saying that an Ancora majority would help address negligence by the current board and address its serious concerns with accountability, two things that we talk about all the time. On the other hand, Matt, ISS's main advisory arm endorsed only 5 of Ancora's 7 nominees, withholding support for Ancora's proposed CEO Jim Barber, but noting that he would likely be a capable executive if he does take over. So ISS, in a span of a couple of days, is sort of overlapping and contradicting itself.
You know what the greatest part about having no opinions is? That you can put out 17 advisory arms that all just conflict with one another. I mean, when you don't have to use data for any of these things, then you can say he would probably be a capable executive.
Fair point.
It doesn't matter. You could say yes or no to that.
ISS's main advisory arm, however, did recommend that shareholders withhold support from incumbent board chair Amy Miles, but they endorsed current CEO Alan Shaw. So again, they're really making this situation confusing. Now, on the other hand, Glass Lewis came out recommending that shareholders support 6 of Ancor's 7 nominees. I think the only one they're not supporting is former Governor Kasich out of Ohio. And they're also recommending support of Ancor's CEO pick, Jim Barber. And significantly, they're also recommending to withhold support from current CEO Alan Shaw and board chair Amy Miles. At the same time, we have 2 unions coming out in support of Ancor. That's the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen Teamsters and the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Teamsters. They are supporting Ancor, whereas there are a dozen or so other unions supporting Norfolk Southern. It sounds like that union support is split right in the middle, 50% for each. But Matt, I ask you this. Does having such a confused amount of opinions, some recommending some directors, some recommending withholding it, some others, do you think this is a negative for Ancor? Does this make the situation less clear? Because now I don't know if shareholders are going to know really how to vote.
No, actually, when you do the math on this, there might be some nuanced differences between 5, 6, 7 Ancora members, like Barber, not Barber.
Yeah.
But clearly, you have unions, you have Glass Lewis, you have ISS, all backing Ancora. You have us backing Ancora in some respect. And then you have Jeff Sonnenfeld backing the Norfolk Southern slate and no one from Ancora. What it looks like is actually a movement towards some level that change needs to happen. That seems to be the message. That seems to be it. I wouldn't focus on the nuance so much as someone from Ancora's slate, multiple people from their slate should be on this board, and the
Right.
culture needs to change.
It also does suggest, on a side note, that ISS is not the monolith that people pretend it to be. There are differing opinions coming out of different parts of their service, right? I mean, it's not just a take this pill and move on. I mean, there are nuances to their recommendations, and I'm sure as a user you could opt into different levels of service. Unlike, I'm saying this only because the anti-ESG movement is claiming that the monopoly of Glass Lewis and ISS are basically ruining capitalism.
Yeah,
So-
on some level, that's right. Like they're
Yeah.
clearly not a monolith of single, thinking where they're saying this is the one recommendation. On the other hand,
Yeah.
what is a recommendation if you recommend every single side? That's not a recommendation. You're not actually using any data or you're not actually making a case. You're just saying vote for whoever you want and we will give you cloud cover. They're an insurance policy for how you vote rather than a recommendation on what you vote.
It is this very company that I think demonstrates our data perhaps in the best way, because we did the math, and with the new directors coming on at Norfolk Southern, 50% of the influence will be held by three people at Norfolk Southern: CEO Alan Shaw, Chair Amy Miles, and Nomination Committee Chair Jennifer Scanlon. So we have a much more quantitative way of attacking this, right? And that is that you have to withhold support from at least two of those directors if you want
Yes.
to gain any power on that board.
Right.
It's not just a random way of doing things. You need to attack the people who actually hold power on these boards.
Not to mention the fact that the only people who have talked about the way they sort of jury rigged talking about skills on the board and appointing people to the committees, and we use Christopher Jones, who went from Mr. to Doctor and suddenly had safety experience, who might actually have safety experience but was never disclosed before and was never relevant before and now is suddenly on there. We're the only people who are actually digging into the people who are making these decisions, understanding the power structure. If you don't use data, it's really hard to make a single recommendation at all. You can make every recommendation, and it's just an insurance policy.
Let's move over to our vote results table. There's a lot going on. There are just so many votes pouring in now every week. Let me just start with that. Is there some kind of conspiracy, Matt, where publicly held corporations in America are trying to prevent shareholders from being involved in more than one shareholder meeting at a time? Because how is anyone supposed to pay attention to all these meetings at once?
Data. The only way you do this is data.
Okay.
Like, stop buying ISS's false
Well,
recommendations and
Can you
use
back that up?
data.
Can you back that up with something later in the show?
I will back it up. It's almost like a segue.
Because I feel overwhelmed. Because here's what I did. I looked at 36 large cap AGM vote results just over the last week. 13 of those were complete nothings. Nothing's going on. Shareholders just they don't have an opinion.
Rubber
it
stamp.
seems.
Yep. No differentiation.
Overall, only 4 directors, and that's out of roughly like 360. Let's call it. It's about an average of about 10 per large cap company. I'll say. I'm just guessing here.
Yeah, that's roughly right.
Only 4 directors even received more than 20% votes against their reelection. And of that, the highest was Joseph Osnos of Global Payments with 26% no, which, he's not going to be going anywhere.
No,
but
he's
that's
there.
it. That's it. So that's 1% of all directors up for election got over 20% against. And as far as even over 10%, only 19 directors, that's only 5%. So really, no one has anything negative to say about directors, at least this last week. In fact, at HP, Matt, all directors received between 98.7% and 99.7% in support of their election.
At HP, yeah.
Think about that. Think how high that is. Between 98.7 and 99.7% support.
I mean, when you
All
get
of them.
numbers, I feel like if you get any number above like 70%, it's casual indifference. When you're talking about 99.7%, as no one agrees that much. There's nobody who's worth 99. But you have a Hall of Fame vote on Michael Jordan. There's always a couple of people who are like, well, maybe not. I mean, it's bananas.
How about this oddity out of Energy? Remember, one of the things you hear about most that the thing that bothers them the most is that they want independent directors on the board. At Energy, shareholders elected former executive vice president Kevin Howell with 99.8% of the vote. He's the former executive at that company.
Why hold a vote? Why hold a vote?
There's also not much going on in SeonPay as well. Only 8 of those 36 companies were over 10% of shareholders said no. And only one was above 17%. That's Citizens Financial Group with 37% of voters saying no on pay. Despite that, Matt, despite the fact that 37% of shareholders said no to pay at Citizens Financial, all of the directors received at least 93% support, including the members of the pay committee. I don't understand that disconnect.
You don't get, of course you don't get it because the people don't do the pay.
I really don't understand that one because 37% that's a lot of anger.
Yeah, that should be. Yeah.
Finally, let's look at some notable shareholder proposals. As far as the anti-ESG ones are concerned, I don't care anymore. They're like walking hate crimes. They get very little support. I don't even want to talk about them anymore. There were 4 independent chair proposals that were oddly consistent in their support, Matt. 31%, 33%, 35%, 32%. They were at Bank of America, Textron, Pfizer, and Kellanova. I don't know why they're so consistent, the independent board chair vote.
So actually, I think like we're catching up to something that was suggested 20 years ago as a way to defray the CEO chair combination. But when you look at the data, independent chairs you can have, if you have an independent chair, that's one thing, but the lead independent director thing is a gaslight. So maybe they're catching up. Maybe people are like catching up to that fact.
The only climate-related proposals that gained any traction this last week were at Bank of America. They both got about 26%, one for disclosure of clean energy financing ratio, one a report on lobbying alignment with Bank of America's climate goals. There were some near misses, including the right to call a special meeting at Texas Instruments and Cigna Group. Again, some consistency here, 46% and 48% in support of those two. And finally, this spring's clear winner by far, and for shareholder proposals, is the simple majority vote. It just missed at Fastenal with 41% support, but big wins at Teledyne Technologies with 81% support and Eversource Energy with 93% support. I don't know why
93%.
I don't know why corporate governance matters in that instance, simple majority vote, because to me, an independent chair on the group of people that are there to provide oversight of company management should be an absolute no-brainer.
No, but now
that should be
just think about it.
99% support.
With that simple majority, they can vote in every director to 99% for vote.
That's it for the last week's vote results table. Let's move on to the big vote. Matt, I'm going to hand this over to you because we're trying something different this week. At first, we struggled with which company to pick. There are 2 mega companies up for a vote next week. That's Berkshire Hathaway as its first Charlie Munger-less meeting on Saturday, and then Advanced Micro Devices, where I believe that's where Jensen Huang's cousin Lisa Su is CEO. I think that's the company. They are having their meeting next week. There's a slew of other well-known companies up for a vote: Colgate-Palmolive, Verizon, etc. So we didn't know how to handle it. So Matt, you had a different type of solution this week. So
look, this is the same problem that if you're an investor, whether you're retail or institutional, you're facing. There are 79 U.S. large cap companies. This is just U.S. companies that have AGMs in the next 7 days.
Wait, 79? I had to cover 36 votes this week for this week. So how am I going to cover 79 votes?
That's the point. It becomes near impossible. Like even if you're an institutional investor with a stewardship team and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of of data, you're supposed to have an informed vote on
Well, you could have me, too. I can represent that team.
850 plus directors is what
possible.
you're voting on. And then there's shareholder proposals on top of that, right? It's nearly impossible to
pay.
keep track of everything. Say on pay, audit, like auditor approvals.
Well, nobody cares
This is
about that
why you see rubber stamps, because there just isn't enough time or bandwidth. So usually these votes would be decided just by a proxy advisor or a policy, like vote against a nominating chair where there's poor diversity on the board, or a comp chair with outsized CEO pay. We're going to do it totally differently. Rather than picking one company, we're going to face the problem the same way investors face them, whether you're retail or institutional. We're going to try using data. We're just going to use the data from Free Flow Analytics.
I was going to make a joke, Matt, that there's a novel idea, but actually it is a novel idea.
It is a novel idea. Nobody actually does it. So we're going to try it, and we're going to focus on just the non-totalitarian boards. And when I say totalitarian boards, it means we're going to get rid of the dual class shares. So I'm not going to give you like a recommendation on Berkshire Hathaway, because it mostly doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. For some of these companies, there's only 57 of them that don't have sort of outsized influence with a founder, a family, a dual class share. Let's ignore those for now. Let's just, we'll come back to them at another date. We need a way to deal with them, mostly by breaking up the dual class nature of them or the influence of them. But we're just going to focus on 72% of the group of U.S. large cap companies coming up for a vote in the next week.
72. Okay, how are you going to do that?
Which is 72% of them, there's 57 of them. And I'm going to start by laying out some ground rules. First, call these policies if you want. But first, these are just philosophical standpoints. A board should represent investors. Can we agree that that's what the board is supposed to do? In which case, directors need a minimum amount of independence. Like in order to, they can't be beholden to management. They have to be independent representation of investors.
So you would not agree with the 99.8% of voters at Energy,
They
which
would
just
never
appointed
be
the former executive vice president to its board to oversee management.
I would not do that, okay?
No.
Boards should have the necessary experience to be on the board, to be a board member of that company. That means executives should be on the board, shouldn't be the only ones on a board with relevant industry experience. It shouldn't be that should never be the case. They shouldn't all be CEOs, because relevant experience includes any relevant experience. So you don't have to be a CEO of a company. Some of them should be smart. Some of them shouldn't have gotten their MBA at Stanford. Like, we want a mix of human beings, most of whom have experience in this industry and can represent shareholders' interests that way. And number 3, boards shouldn't have obvious red flags. And by that, I mean, you should not have board members who have a long track record of going board to board with controversies everywhere, or restating financials everywhere they go, or shareholder returns always seem to dip over the 10 years that they're on the board, right? Okay, so can we just agree on those three basic ground rules? They should represent investors, they should have necessary experience, and they largely shouldn't have massive red flags attached to them.
Okay.
That seems like a really, really low bar.
It's a reasonable starting point.
That's where I'm going to start. I'm going to use the data. It actually brings us to a new problem, which is,
of course it does.
When we look at the boards on these issues, the only companies, of the 57 companies that are not dual class, like I said, 57 companies, only 4 of them have none of these issues.
Well, you say that's a problem, but to me that represents an opportunity. I've been saying for at least the last year now that board refreshment it's not a negative. It represents an opportunity.
Well, no, yes, I totally.
So
I
I'm
agree
saying,
with that
like,
philosophically.
Okay, but I'm saying that then investors and people who care about these votes, they have 53. You're saying they have 53 out of 57 companies where they can target directors for board refreshment.
Sure. What I'm saying the problem is I didn't eliminate any companies. Like,
I see.
Like, as an investor, I'm trying to limiit the pool of targeting
Trying to
so that I
reduce
can
your workload.
reduce the workload, right? Be efficient. It doesn't reduce it. In fact, all of these companies have one problem, and There were actually several that had all three.
Okay,
as a
I want to
problem.
hear this. Yeah, I want to hear these companies.
So that's where I started. Okay, I started with the companies that have all three issues. Those companies are GE, Uber,
yeah.
Arthur Gallagher,
Okay.
Colgate Palmolive, CSX, and WEC Energy Group.
Okay. Wait. So those 6 companies had all of those problems. Okay.
All
wow.
of the problems.
Yeah.
Wow. They basically have an independence problem. They have red flags on the board, and they have our board members who do not, like, all of the relevant experience is held by just the executives, right? Like not the investor elected share.
I would suggest for any activists who might be listening to this show that in itself could be a great flag to a great potential target for an activist, right? When you have so many concurrent problems going on at your board, like you just listed, it seems like a pretty good target. Am I wrong?
I mean,
Matt?
it's a way to narrow down the list too.
Yeah.
Like let's focus on the worst of the worst, and then which one of them, is a poor performer that we can unlock value if you're an activist. But for the purposes of this show, I'm going to focus a lot on those. And all my vote recs are going to come from those. It's
already a lot of work. 6 companies.
And part 2, my votes are going to come from just individual director outliers who I can't. There's a couple of categories, and I can't make sense of like why these directors keep.
Will
getting
you
elected.
at least post this maybe on LinkedIn or somewhere where people can access this?
This
Because this can be a lot of information.
If you're not taking notes, I'm going to post this on our website, freefloat.llc. I'll also post it on LinkedIn, so follow us, and we can send this to you. All right. But let's start with let's start with Arthur Gallagher, just off the top, okay? CEO, chair, and Gallagher child, Pat Gallagher, has 49% of the influence at this company. It's just under totalitarian. It's basically totalitarian, but it's not quite. He's been on the board with David Johnson for 20 years and Bill Bax for 18 years, with the average company tenure on the board at 14 years. The 3 of them control 67% of the board influence. And for their efforts on this board, investors have gotten strong TSR and weak earnings, which makes me really suspicious. Like, how does TSR outpace earnings? But they've had multiple restatements along the way. In fact, Bill Bax himself is over the average mandatory retirement age for most S&P 500 companies. And I think an easy win here is you break up the power trio by bringing in some new directors. So my first recommendation at Arthur Gallagher, vote against Bill Bax, vote against David Johnson.
Out of curiosity, why would you not recommend a vote against Pat Gallagher?
You can. I'm just, I think that
it's too much. It's never going to happen.
I mean, I think if you're an investor and you clearly like what Gallagher has been doing, right? Your TSR has been strong for the company. TSR is strong across the directors. So if you like what Gallagher's doing, but you're worried about keeping some check and balance,
some guardrails,
then you're just putting some guardrails on by getting rid of the 2 people he's basically been golfing with for the last 20 years. Like, just take them off the board.
Yeah, and according to a study, I think you told me that directors work an average of 200 hours a year, right?
Yes,
on their board. Right, so it sounds like there's plenty of other hours left to go golfing with Bill Bax.
There's a lot of time.
And David Johnson.
There's a lot of time.
Okay.
Second up, Uber.
Oh, yes.
All right, so these are all short tenured directors. Thanks to Kalanick's failure, people have eyes on a board like Uber.
I was going to say
right?
corporate, a failure of a founder, a failure of corporate governance basically led to a revamping of Uber's board, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yes, and they brought quote unquote adults into the room, right? Like the goal
lot
was
of heavy
professional
hitters.
board members.
For those of you who are familiar with directors, and they have a lot of heavy hitters, a lot of like famous quote unquote directors sit on their board.
Famous to like 7 governance wonks that like nobody else cares about.
Right.
But actually, those famous directors, they put their stamp on this board in a way that we are well past Kalanick, and it might be time to stop running the board like it's children and start running it like you want some independence in there. Because what famous directors tend to do, and we see this in multiple places, is they tend to bring in other famous directors that they know and have worked with before. And you end up with boards that are like classic American aristocracy boards like Boeing and 3M and Deere. And we've covered a lot of them in this show, but they tend to be these like middle America board royalty. And that's who runs the company at that point. That's not necessarily what you want at Uber. And by way of example, at Uber, you have Ursula Burns and Ron Sugar. Ron Sugar might be my favorite board member of all time. They actually have 7 loops back to the board. And when I say loops, I mean they have sat on boards with another director somewhere else that loops back to the Uber board somehow within 2 loops, within 2 degrees.
Okay.
Burns and Sugar have 7 loops back to the board. Bob Eckert has 5. Wang Lin Martello has 5. They're all on the nominating committee. So what's happening is the nominating committee is choosing its own friends, people they're comfortable with, and populating the board with them. Most of the time you have management doing that. Now you have the board members doing that. Neither case is investors doing that, where investors are comfortable with the people. Sugar actually has higher influence than CEO Dara, which happens really infrequently and usually indicates a board-led company. And that's not great because the boards that Sugar has been on have been riddled with controversy, including Chevron, including Apple's had their issues. He's been on, he was at Northrop Grumman. The boards of the company he's been on have had usually long histories of controversies. So while we might have needed some adults in the room post Kalanick, I'm not sure that like we want to compromise independence on the way to that.
Okay.
50% of the board influence is held by the nominating committee alone.
Wow.
So my recommendation here is to begin the process of breaking up the American royal board aristocracy and installing some independence on this board. Vote against Ron Sugar. That would be my recommendation.
It almost seems like to me in these cases where you're cleaning up messes led by petulant founders and CEOs. And isn't it funny that I just saw Travis Kalanick in the news because I think he attended Elon Musk's anti-Biden dinner over the last few days.
Okay. Yeah.
But there almost should be sunset clauses on the adult directors that you say that come in to maybe like clean up the boardroom. And to your point, they don't need to be there forever, right? That may be like a few years and then get the hell out, right? Have them maybe nominate some new people. And
I mean, kudos to them for putting guardrails on what has been a controversial company and was even more
except
so.
Kalanick was so terrible.
It was a low bar.
It's what should be happening at Tesla right now, but just somehow is not happening.
You'll see it happen eventually. That's my guess at Tesla. All right, so vote against Ron Sugar at Uber. Now GE, Ed Garden got on this board via Trian and Nelson Peltz.
Nelson Peltz, yeah.
Nelson Peltz. And Garden has 12 loops back to other board members. He's highly connected to the existing board members. His board history includes other Trian winners like Wendy's. And he was at Bank of New York Mellon. It's actually resulted in a negative market cap value added of negative $563 million, meaning at all the boards he's been on in the last 5 to 7 years, he's added negative $563 million of value to those companies.
Okay.
So we have a person who's highly interconnected to all the board members, negative value add, and he's sitting on the board with Sebastian Bazin, who has 8 flags for restatements across all the boards that he's been on, and Steve Angel, who's a former executive at GE.
Okay.
Trian's role is over here. I think this is a very simple, like, thank you, 2017, you got on this board, you did some stuff, GE's getting spun off. It's a totally different beast from when you bought in. Time to get off the board. So vote against Ed Garden on the GE board.
Okay.
Now, I want to stress something here because I've got a couple more to go.
Yeah.
I did not do this. I did this morning. Using our data.
Yeah, way to sell your effort.
Well, I'm just saying that, like,
you're saying that this can be achieved.
This can be achieved
hastily.
I reviewed over 50 companies, found outlier companies, and was able to do deepish dives, and not even the deepest dives, right? There's a lot more I could do. But I'm not a team of 25 stewardship analysts at Vanguard doing this.
If you're a listener to this show, you either need to already be signed up to our platform at freeflowanalytics.com, and you should be reaching out to us for further consulting and the whole data package, API, everything. It's time. It's time
because I managed to come up with vote recommendations based on data, and I did it in a morning and a half.
We can take the analysis that ISS and Glass Lewis does to places that has never existed before,
never been achieved
a
before.
Quantitative analysis of AGM votes. What else do you have?
All right, I got a couple more. Let's do Colgate, and we'll do them quickly, okay?
Do them quickly and then move on to your outliers, because we can post all of the details.
We can post all the details. I mean, I think
Pick a good one.
Colgate's interesting to me because this is a board with 3 ex or current lead independent directors on it.
Of Colgate?
Of Colgate.
Okay.
John Cahill, Steve Sadove, and their newest lead independent director, Lori Norrington.
Okay.
All Colgate lead independent directors, all still on the board. Cahill and Sadove have 19 and 17 years of tenure.
Wow.
At some point, Cahill has actually a negative 3.4 billion cap value added and a 286 TSR batting average. At some point, don't you say we really only need one lead independent director?
I would say I would be pretty intimidated to be a new director on that board, no matter how qualified I would be. You walk into a board with like 18 former lead directors who've been on the board since 1961. You're a little intimidated to speak up maybe at the first meeting.
It's not really, So I'm saying vote against.
All those. You don't need that.
Keep the current lead independent director, Lori Norrington, and vote against Sadove and Cahill. You don't need all the lead independent directors, just the one.
According to our data, that opens up 28% of board influence.
That's correct.
You could get powerful new voices in their place.
Very powerful new voices. CSX. CSX actually, John Hendricks, the newish CEO, 2022, I believe, barely ekes out 2 other directors for influence. He has 17% to Zan Vatronaut's 15 and John Zilmer's 15. Vatronaut has 5 restatements to her name and a negative $2 billion cap value added.
Wow.
To boot, there is no one with direct rail experience on this board, managing a railroad, working at a railroad, except for Hendricks. In fact, 44% of board experience is finance and law. Are you running a railroad or are you running a law firm? It doesn't make any sense. The thing that really got me, though, is that Vatronaut, who has 5 restatements to her name across multiple boards, is on the audit committee, and she's a lawyer by trade.
Ooh.
Vote against Zan Vatronaut. Start to break up. That's 15% of the influence you can unlock, and you can add rail experience onto the board.
Okay.
And then finally, for the company's WEC, this one really got me because Gail Klappa is executive chair.
Sounds like they all got you, to be fair, but yeah, keep going.
I mean, like I picked like the data-driven worst of the worst. Gail Klappa is executive chair. And Klappa's been sitting on the board for 20 years with 2 other directors who have been there for 20 years, Ulyss Payne and Kurt Culver. Okay. Ulyss Payne is connected to other directors in 15 different ways on this board.
Wow.
Basically, Ulyss Payne is just a board feedback effect. He's also the pay chair and pays Klappa and the current CEO, because Klappa is executive chair, right? So the pay committee chooses the executive chair's pay along with the CEO's pay. Klappa's not a founder. There is no reason to have an executive chair on this board, and unless you hate the current CEO much.
There's never a reason. Yeah.
And Payne is the worst performing TSR on the board, batting .418. You vote against Payne here and vote against Klappa.
I mean, there's never a reason to have the chair of your board, which is there to provide independent oversight of management, to be a part of management. Never.
I agree.
There's never a reason.
There's never a reason. And that gets us to director outliers. I'm just going to go through a few of these quick, all right?
Okay.
Here was my personal favorite. The "Why Are You Still Here" crowd.
Okay.
The people that clearly must have just gotten forgotten.
People say that about me a lot in my life.
Oh, you still here? Yeah, it's like the party happened 3 hours ago, and they're still on the couch, and you're trying to ask them nicely to leave.
You're talking about basically U.S. corporate directors, though. Let's be fair, but yeah, keep going. What do you got?
These are long tenured, not executive, non founders, and I only focus this list on 30-year tenured directors. 30 years of tenure.
Okay.
Mike Smith, 18% of the influence at Zebra Technologies. He's the ex-chair and current lead independent director. He's been on this board for 33 years.
Wow. He's
the nominating chair. He's on the pay committee. He's not a founder. He's not an executive. What are you doing there? Why are you still here? Like who keeps voting for you? Leo Coleman, 21% influence, Omnicom, another lead quote unquote independent director.
Right.
He's on the nom and comp committees, 31 years of tenure. He's got connections to other board members, and he's got the most average TSR you can have, 508.
To me,
what do we
if you
keep reelecting you for?
If you have the audacity to call if a company calls a director a lead independent director after being on the board for 30 years, that should disqualify you. There should be some like trapdoor where the SEC gets rid of you.
I mean, you can't even do that in London. In the UK, it's 10 years, right?
Yes,
You're not independent after 10 years. This is 30. And then finally, David Preezer, 17% influence at NVR on the pay and nominating committees.
Okay.
Again, another 30 year. What are you still doing here? All right, here's my second group.
Okay.
The Jack Welch group. Jack Welch famously would fire the bottom 10% of performers. Is there a reason
I like this.
why investors wouldn't do this?
Well, this was my original thesis statement, right? If we just target the bottom 10% of every board, which basically means one director annually, it really sets up a great opportunity for annual refreshment. I mean, you can bring in amazing people every year, right?
That would be great. 10% of every board. I just said the bottom 10% of all boards globally. Okay. I mean, like these are the bottom of feeders. The bottom. This is the bottom 10% of everyone.
Let's hear it.
Pete Wilver, 8% influence on Baxter International. He's on 3 boards and somehow manages a 102 TSR batting average.
Wow. That's low.
3 boards, you've had a shot. You've had the 3 shots to get that up. It's time.
It's time.
And then Norman Wright, 6% influence at First Solar. He's on 2 boards and he bets 179 for TSR.
Oof, okay.
These are some of the worst performing directors for TSR, for investors, for what you care about as an investor in the world. Don't worry about this board or the world. The whole world. Mm-hmm. And then finally, the over-networked and overworked.
Okay.
And this is mostly because I wanted some reason to vote out Alex Cutler, 22% influence at KeyCorp. He has 22 loops back to KeyCorp. He's the nom chair and the lead quote-unquote independent director. He's been choosing his friends for 24 years on this board. Let someone else choose some of their friends for the board.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of, just in this list alone, we're seeing a consistent misuse of the term lead independent director.
Yeah. And my last one, Melanie Healy, 9% influence of Verizon, 12 years on the board and 21 board loops back. So in summary, I took 54 companies and I found you. I didn't find you, out of the 800 directors, 100 to vote against. I actually just said 16 votes against. Doesn't that sound reasonable? You can't muster. Doesn't it? Like we've been told it's really aggressive to vote against directors. That is 1.8% of the director pool that's available.
I would have liked more than that, but
of course,
to start.
I could have gotten way more aggressive. This feels incredibly conservative to target these people.
Sure.
Bill Bax, David Johnson, Ron Sugar, Ed Garden. You'll find the list on our website if you want the final list.
Beautiful. I love this. That's it. That's the Proxy Countdown for the week of April 29th, 2024. Join us next week when we jump back into the alternative democracy pool. Forever on the lookout for shareholder sharks, floating band-aids, and wayward directors.
You should make that wayward lead independent.